It's here. It's now. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California. About to have a conversation with Kenny Kahn of Blue Rock Vineyards in the Alexander Valley. Introductions in just a moment. Hey, have a listen to Laura Donadoni. It was an incredible story of perseverance. She's the Italian wine girl she goes by on social networking. But her husband, much like the Fatty Arbuckle, and for my listeners who don't know who that is, he's a very famous silent movie star whose career was ruined through false accusations. By the time he was cleared, his career was over. And Laura Donadoni's husband was done the same in Italy. His career was over. They came to America, started a new one, and here she is telling the story, the Italian wine girl. Have a listen. But not while we're here today. Here to have a conversation with Kenny Kahn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm going to call you Kenny, even though everybody calls you, you're listed as Kenneth everywhere. But Kenny is...
I go by Kenny.
So
Kenny Lee in Memphis.
In Memphis.
In the South, you have to have two names.
That's on this list here of things. It fascinates me sometimes on how these stories get there. We're going to peel your story back during this conversation. But you're from Memphis. You're from the South. But you end up in Sonoma. Tell me what was happening in Memphis when you were growing up that you got here. That part, we're going to peel that back. But
well, that's a good starting point. I mean, so Memphis, Tennessee, my Southern accent is coming back.
Yeah,
was not a wine and food town. So when I was growing up, this was the 1960s, 1970s. We didn't even have a Chinese restaurant. I'm still learning how to use chopsticks. We had barbecue.
Chinese.
We had great barbecues. So Rendezvous in Memphis, if you haven't ever been to Rendezvous, put it on your bucket list. Yeah. It is fantastic. But that was fine dining in Memphis. So I really knew nothing about wine. I hate to admit it, but Mad Dog 2020, ever had that?
Right, yeah. Delicious.
Delicious. Yeah, we'd have it on the front porch when we were in college and never made it off the front porch. But so my introduction to wine, and like all of us who love wine have had that sort of that time in our life where all of a sudden we say, hey, this is interesting.
Yes.
I was in my 20s, newlywed to my wife, Cheryl, who I'm still married to 44 years later.
Congratulations.
And to her, yes. And
oh, wait, that's a funny joke, though. I've actually used that in Rotary Club. Like, how long have you been married? 44 years. Not to the same person, but at least I've been married 44 years. So. Go ahead.
With a few breaks in between, right. I'm sure. But we had the good fortune of living next door to Milton Picard. And Milton Picard, Pick, as we lovingly called him, he was an attorney in his 70s. And Pick sort of adopted me as his son. He had a daughter, but never had a son. And the good thing is that Pick had been collecting first-growth Bordeaux's, Burgundies, wines from the Loire Valley, all from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And as my adopted father, he said, look, you come over to my house. I'm going to teach you about wine.
Wow.
I didn't have a choice.
What was he doing in Memphis that he would collect first-growth Bordeaux and Grand Cru Burgundy?
There were always people, and this is really his generation was after the Second World War, when wine wasn't something that was very popular, but there was, people who were well-educated and worldly still had an interest in wine, although it was a budding interest in America and a very small one. And he was part of a group in Memphis, mostly a part of a group of attorneys who had been collectors. And honestly, so I'd go over to Pick's house. Cheryl and I would go over, and he'd have a smile on his face. He was so excited because he's going to share his wines and get us interested. He said, Kenny, I want you to try this wine. And he'd give us, they were all in Baccarat glasses.
Oh, of course.
So you couldn't sneeze without one of them breaking. And he said, try this. It's a 1955 Margaux. What do you think? And then he'd bring out the good stuff for Cheryl.
Wow.
1961 Domaine Romani Conti. Do you like it?
Wow.
It's like, oh my God, And so he changed our lives. He really did. He opened my eyes to what wine could be all about. And then about the same time, my brother went to England and went to the wine school that Stephen Spurrier had.
Oh yeah, right.
And I don't know the name
of line, but I forgot the name of the school. Okay, go ahead.
But he came back to Memphis and he was in love with wine and started a wine shop. So you put these two together and all of a sudden, wow, I'm getting interested too. And there wasn't a whole lot to do in Memphis. So my wife and I would do cooking classes on the weekend. So I started cooking, never professionally,
right,
but really seriously as an amateur. So you put that food and wine together. And then Cheryl and I were just starting our professional career. So I was in the investment business. And I had a firm in Memphis that I had the good fortune of selling to Security Pacific Bank. So I was 28.
Wow, Security Pacific Bank.
You remember those guys?
Well, actually, my father-in-law's building up the street from here was a Security Pacific Bank.
Yeah, well, they had the biggest bank in L.A., the biggest building.
Yeah.
So I sold my firm to them. I was 28 years old, had a little bit of money.
Yeah.
My wife was just graduating from her residency in radiology in Memphis. We didn't have any children at the time. We looked at each other and said, what do you want to do with your lives? Now's the time where we can do what we want to do. There are these moments where you can. Lots of times once you have children and a mortgage, you can't do it.
That's right.
And so we went to the only fine dining restaurant in Memphis at the time, Chez Philippe. And that was in the Peabody Hotel where the ducks come out on the red carpet. And Chez Philippe, French restaurant, the sommelier had a taste fan. So Pick had given us a bottle. It was a half bottle. And I remember this like yesterday. In 1978, BV George de la Tour.
Wow.
We're having it in this beautiful restaurant. We looked at each other and I said, Cheryl, sweetheart, I want to go to California. We had taken our honeymoon out here and we went from San Francisco on Highway 1 down south to Carmel, that beautiful road. Loved Carmel, went back to Memphis, and here we're having this dinner. We said, I want to go to California.
I'm going to stop you here for a second because you said it so much, and I want to kind of break it down.
Okay, sure.
Because I just wrote some notes. For one, let's go back to the beginning. You write on your website and you write about your story about love at first sight when you met your wife, Cheryl. Is this accurate? Does it really exist?
It really.
Did we really?
Oh no, it really exists because we had. So our first date was a blind date, and Cheryl lived next door to my brother's fiance, Peggy, and so that was the introduction. It was a blind date, and we went to see Superman 1 with Christopher Reeve.
You know how to do it, man.
So I told you, it's 44 years ago. That really dates things. And now my wife is Hollywood gorgeous, I got to tell you.
Wow.
She was then, and she is today. And so that's the physical part. It was like, oh, wow.
Duh, right?
Duh. I was like, what else? And also so intelligent, and she was just lovely to be with. And we had a great first date, but I was so nervous.
Really?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was tongue-tied. I was nervous. I don't know why she went out with me a second time. Well, I do know why.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm a great salesman.
Yeah.
I talked her into it. But no, it was absolutely love at first sight for me. I don't think it was for her. But we did get married 6 months later.
Wow,
and
that
she
would
wasn't
be rather
pregnant.
quick.
It wasn't because, of anything like that. It was just that, that's really, that's what we wanted to do. And, it's lasted for 44 years.
So she was studying to be a doctor at that point or no?
She was. So when we met, she was in her last year of medical school. And
so that's fascinating. Memphis, the South, barbecue. By the way, I ordered Rendezvous's rub once. It's not still on the shelf. Yeah, I mean,
if it's still on the shelf, use it. I'll tell you how to use it. That's great. In Memphis, they put it on eggs for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. So here you get married. You go 6 months later. You take this drive down Highway 1, and we talk. It's like, what were you thinking? I understand the attraction to fine wine. And there's that moment. We talk about that aha moment. And just for a fun story, my dad had a whole vertical of George Latour at his wine shop in this picture behind you.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And when we sold the
Let's
store,
drink it.
Yeah. When we sold, I don't think I have anything left. When we sold the store, well, I took over the wine club in 1988. In 1989, I found one of my employees standing on the side of the road waiting for his ride, and he's holding 2 bottles of wine he had stolen from the warehouse.
Oh, yeah.
And so, actually, I didn't do it. It was my manager. She pulls over and she goes, "What are you doing?" to the guy, and he's like, "What? You know what?" And he's holding his 2. It was 68 George Latour that he had stolen.
Oh my God!
He had no idea what he had taken.
He's just gonna like,
yeah. He was his girlfriend and have a glass.
And have a glass of whatever it is.
Fall in love and get
Probably
married.
Doesn't like it because it's not sweet.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so you get married.
I tell you, the 78 was delicious.
I bet it was.
It was eye opening.
I wonder if the French restaurant guy cared. Like you brought the bottle in. Is that what you said that you told me?
Oh, we brought it in. I was actually friends with the owners of the restaurant.
Okay, so it's all right.
It was the Bells family who owned the hotel.
Yeah. And
Gary Bells and I grew up together. And he actually introduced me to the chef of the restaurant, Jose. And I sous chefed for him. Not really, but they put me in the restaurant for one day.
That's nice.
Because I was so interested. And Jose said, "Okay, here's your job for the day." So he was making a sea bass en cru. And my job was to wrap the puff pastry and decorate it for the day.
Well, that's a pretty responsible job.
Well, I knew what I was doing.
You know, I mean,
I'd kind of not culinary school, but
he must have trusted you.
Well, no, that was the job that you don't trust somebody with. You could always do a redo if you don't like it.
So you're driving down Highway 1 and you get the scatterbrain idea that you want to be in the wine business.
Well, it was wine and food, so I really didn't know. Yes, but I didn't know what I wanted to do because I didn't know anything about the wine business. I knew the investment business because that was my background.
You know, I did this for 35 years. I still don't know anything about the wine business.
It's so complex. And as we were talking earlier, it's like ever changing, and now it's changing faster than ever. But no, I really didn't know what part of it, whether it was going to be on the production side. My brother had a retail store, so I thought I loved wine bar. I loved food and really thought about either a restaurant or a very high-end, I'm going to call it grocery store, but not really, more, really guagua and wine and higher end things like that. But my wife talked me out of being in the restaurant business. Thank you, Cheryl.
She really said that to her.
She says, "Look, I'm behind just about anything that you want to do."
Yeah.
And she's been behind the winery, even though she's not really engaged at all in the winery. She did a career as a radiologist for 20 some odd years, and now she's a painter and doing just beautiful work as a painter.
Wow.
So she really supported what I wanted to do. She's been wonderful because it takes a lot of money because we didn't come in with money.
A lot of perseverance, a lot of time.
And a lot of time and commitment. And so she's been wonderful to be behind that the whole time.
That's nice.
She says, "You're not doing a restaurant."
But I read some more about somebody worked in Chez Panisse, or you went to Chez Panisse.
No, we went to Chez Panisse.
Oh, okay.
And it was that trip. It was that sort of trip.
That same trip.
That when we were in San Francisco.
That was 80-something?
That was probably, I would say, the early 1980s, because it took us a while to sort of, get things sold in Memphis and organized. She had to finish her residency also in radiology before we could go.
So that would have been in the arc of American cuisine, the change in American cuisine and the farm-to-table movement and all of that.
It was the very
right in the middle of it. Yeah. Well, maybe the beginning, yes. Early 80s.
Early 80s, it hadn't really yet made it to Memphis and the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, that's...
Whereas now I'm amazed. As I travel, you can go anywhere in America, even small towns, and there's going to be fine dining. There's people who are interested, and they're doing something wonderful with it. I've been surprised that every city has a farmer's market now.
Right.
And I think we really owe that in large measure to Alice Waters. I mean, she deserves all that attention, because think of all the chefs that came out of Chez Panisse.
Of course. And so and you were there, though. This is what's fascinating about sort of part of your story that isn't written anywhere. And that is, one, Chez Panisse being, like you said, the crux of that movement and creating people like Waxman and Jonathan and everybody else. But then your brother, went to Steven Spurrier's wine school with Patricia Gasteau. I mean, I went to Cave de Madeleine. It's there. It's not the same one. And in French, I was telling the woman, I go, oh, I came here because of, I've had Steven Spielberg on my show. And she goes, no, it's not the same place. They've moved and all
Right.
there.
Of course, he passed away last year.
Right. He passed away actually like 6 weeks after he was on my show. It's crazy.
No kidding.
But this is, both of those things are really historically important events for our industry, not only with the wine side with the Cave de Madeleine and of course, the Judgment of Paris, but things like Chez Panisse, because that moved the needle for wine too, because fine food needed fine wine. So you were inspired by this.
Of course they go together. And they went together with me. I was interested in both. And of course, today with the new generation not as interested in wine, is that we need to have another Chez Panisse moment,
right?
To get people back into understanding that wine is experiential, wine is wonderful. Maybe it's become too industrial, too corporate to have the interest of the younger generation.
Good point. Like I told you, I had a podcast yesterday with one of the big companies, $300 million wine company, and so I was trying to have trying to peel that back to see how they think, what the difference in the thinking is, but here you are now. You've experienced fine food. You consider yourself an amateur chef. Sonoma is still a pretty rural place, even after all these years. I mean, particularly compared to Napa. And you stumble across this dilapidated, roofless building and think, this is a good idea. How did that happen?
Well, I didn't stumble up, first of all. So first, Cheryl and I moved to San Francisco in 1985, and we started our professional careers. And I started looking for a business. So I did look at food businesses, and I looked at a place called Hoffman and Husband, which is very much like an Oakville grocery, fine grocery, lots of wine, a retailer, and decided not to do that. At the same time, I was looking at wineries to buy. I was looking at vineyard land. I was learning. And sadly, one of the things I learned is that I didn't have enough money to do any of these things because we had big eyes and big dreams, but we really didn't have a lot of money. And, but we persevered. And after 2 years of looking and not being able to afford pretty much anything, but also getting some knowledge of, do I want to be in the vineyard business or the wine business or the food business? After 2 years of looking, I got a call from a realtor in Healdsburg. And he said, look, I know you've been looking for 2 years. I have a place for you that I want you to take a look at. It's 120 acres.
Wow.
It's a hillside property that has a historic winery called Villa Maria that was bonded in 1880.
Wow.
And he said the magic words, it's in foreclosure, and you've been looking for 2 years. Why don't you come up and take a look?
Wow.
Now, Sonoma, so this is 1985. Sonoma, and you hinted at this earlier, was really not wine country at that time. You had Jordan had moved into Alexander Valley. I think it was 1976, but was really not exactly an upstart, but wasn't a big deal in terms of brand recognition by then either. But after Jordan and maybe a couple of others, there wasn't hardly anything in Alexander Valley. So in 85, it was more prunes, plums, some, animal husbandry. And if you think about Sonoma even today, wine is only a not small, but it's a minority portion of the agriculture in Sonoma. Sonoma, unlike Napa, is really very diversified. So there's still a lot of other agriculture, certainly animal husbandry, cheese making, and so on. So Sonoma still has a diversification. But anyway, so this property was in foreclosure because no one was interested in it. I showed up with the bankruptcy court, and no one else showed up. And I wondered, well, where is everybody?
Wow, that's great.
So part of the reason is that the property had serpentine all throughout the property, and serpentine is a blue rock, sometimes blue-green, but in our case, a bluish rock that's very high in magnesium. And magnesium prevents the uptake of potassium in things that are growing, whether it's vines or trees or whatever you're growing. So it makes for pretty marginal growing conditions. And so if you think of 1985, if you were going to plant a vineyard in Sonoma, and again, not very much being planted, you'd have to have high production because the price per ton was virtually nothing. The only buyer at that time was Gallo.
Yeah.
And they were actually putting, great Alexander Valley Cabernet into a Hardy Burgundy.
Yeah, really.
That's why it was so good.
We were selling it right there in that shop.
It was Hardy Burgundy was good stuff because they had access to really good quality grapes that weren't expensive. So, no one was interested because in the valley floor in Alexander Valley, you had the deep, rich soils, you had plenty of water, and you could grow 6-7 tons per acre. And even at $400, $500, $600 a ton, you could make a living, but you couldn't here. So anyway, nobody wanted it. And I was so excited. So I visited the property. Oh my God, I fell in love with it. It's beautiful. It's 300 to 600 foot elevation from the lower part of the vineyard to the upper part. And then you had, at the time, the vines weren't there, but the beauty was there. So we have views of all of Alexander Valley. It's just gorgeous. It looks like Tuscany.
Wow.
And I had been to Tuscany. I'd been to Umbria. I'd been to Provence. And this just, really struck the chord with me as like, wow, what potential there is here. And I'll never forget, I went up, so the 1880s winery, Villa Maria, 3-story stone and redwood barn, basically. So on the bottom, it wasn't bottom floor, it's below grade, they kept the barrels, and it was 18-inch thick stone walls.
Wow.
Then on the next floor, it was a barn. It was empty, so they would use it for other things. They'd pitch the hay in there or whatever you do at the barn. And then in the 3rd story, so I remember walking up this really rickety staircase because the building was derelict. Half of the roof was gone.
Yeah.
But I walked up this staircase, and then I went to, it was sheathed in redwood shiplap, 130-year-old redwood,
beautiful.
Which, by the way, we've reused.
Oh, beautiful.
Every piece of it. We've repurposed it. But anyway, there was a hole. So we're up on the 3rd story, and we're up on a hillside anyway, overlooking Alexander Valley. And a woodpecker had, put a hole in the wood. And I looked through that hole. So we're up high. We're probably at a 600-foot elevation. Looked at Alexander Valley. And I just said, oh, my God.
That's amazing.
Oh, my God.
What a great moment.
This is just,
this is before you went
I fell in love with my wife, and I fell in love with the property.
This is before or after? Or this is before you went to the court?
No, this is before.
Yeah.
This is before. So like I fell in love with my wife, and it was instantaneous. I fell in love with this property, and it was instantaneous. I'm still in love with my wife, and I'm still in love with Blue Rock.
But she went home and you said, honey, I've got this. Was she with you?
She was not with me.
Oh,
she was not with me, but she believes in me.
Well,
and but of course she did visit the property before we bought it.
Right.
So we really wound up making a deal with the bankruptcy court. And part of the deal was good karma, is that it was in bankruptcy. We gave the guy who was at the property, we let him have all of his farming equipment so he could still make a living doing something else, because that was a sad story.
Yeah.
That wound up working out for everyone. And it was good karma. It really worked out for us too. So we bought the property, 120 acres, and that was the beginning of our romance, if you will, with Blue Rock and converting it into what it is Blue Rock today.
That's interesting. I mean, you said a lot, so I want to back up a little bit, because when you visit a property like that and you're looking through this hole and you're saying to yourself, geez, I got to have this place. It's amazing. That doesn't just happen because you stumbled across, and I use that word again, but that you had gone to France, you had been to Italy, you'd been to Umbria, Tuscany. And so this romantic vision of the wine business and property and is sort of mulling itself in the back of your mind already, right?
Oh,
so did you go to Europe looking for that inspiration? You just went because, it was something you should do.
I went to Europe because I wanted to go to Europe.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be in the wine country. And it was inspirational. I don't think I went for inspiration.
But you got inspired.
But, how can you not get inspired?
No, I agree. We're leaving on the 22nd to hang out in Tuscany.
Oh, my God. Well, Cheryl and I, we did Well, we've done a lot of great wine country travel, but, two in particular. We went to Bordeaux.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, this first trip was to Burgundy, and we went on a bicycle trip through Burgundy.
Wow.
And have you ever done that?
I've never been on a bike trip in Burgundy. No, I've been in Burgundy, of
All
course.
right.
But
Well, you're young. You got to do that.
Well, I'm a biker, actually. I'm a road biker, but
you don't even have to be. Today, you can get an e-bike.
yeah, that's true.
And and the wonderful
But I'm
thing.
categorically against e-bikes. I live on the beach, in Hermosa Beach. I hate those things, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you know what? If your wife isn't a
Yeah,
biker
she's like,
and you want to do a bike trip, she
Right,
can go
you're
with
right.
you. So I feel the
you're in
same.
Burgundy.
But anyway, we're in Burgundy, and this was actually 1988, so it was after we bought the property. But it was so inspiring because on a bike, you're going so much slower. You smell everything. You can stop and talk to people. And in Burgundy, all the great vineyards are on back roads. They're not on the highway.
Mm-hmm.
They're up at a higher elevation. And the back road is basically, it's vineyard workers and tractors.
Right.
And you go by, and there's a stone wall, and on the stone wall, it says Von Romani.
Mm-hmm.
On the next stone wall, it says Romani Conti. And I have my picture on a bike. I've been on my bike, and Cheryl takes a picture of me in front of the Romani Conti. I won't call it a sign because it's stone on the wall.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And but is that inspirational? Absolutely.
Oh, of course. This is there's a guy yesterday. I'll net a story out of here in 30 seconds. He, at the end of the podcast, he says, his name is Alex Gambal. He says, when I was a winemaker. Well, this guy was born in Washington, D.C. He was a real estate developer. He met a negociant, did a stage month or so in Burgundy, stayed there for 20 years, ended up with 35 acres of vineyards.
Really?
And then got out of it, sold it to Jean-Charles Boisset, and now lives in Idaho. And I said, wait a minute. I go, you can't just say when I was a winemaker, because look what happened between, how you got there. But that's the inspiration, I think, that Burgundy produces for you. But since you were there and you've been to other parts of Europe, and you're a foodie and you're a chef, I have this great respect for, and I'll flip it the other way, I have this great respect for the way the French and the Italians protect their regions, and they protect their food, and they protect their, Bologna is Bologna, right? There's different salamis and dried meats from every town across the Tuscan, landscape. In France, the AOC protects not only wine, but it protects butter and it protects cheese. And we didn't have that in America. And it seems like your experience with food in the early 80s is when that sort of idea started to come back to the American palate and the American plate, that yes, we're going to create our own cuisine, and we're also going to sort of establish ourselves as food people. Do you have respect for that protection, or do you think it's old school that they do that?
That's such a good question. I have to really think about it. Words like sense of place have, it's so common that it becomes sort of meaningless. But where you grow something really does impact what it tastes like. And the Cabernet, for example, from Alexander Valley really does taste different than taste from Cabernet that's grown in any other region. And we have, we do
should
tastings,
be, right?
We do comparative tastings all the time, so we know that. The differences sometimes are subtle. So, but they are there. So for people who have an interest, I do think that, labeling things where they come from is great, but you're going to find a subset of consumers who really care anything about it. But that subset is big enough where I think it is important. But what I really discovered when I was in Burgundy and in the Loire Valley and my travels in Europe is that they have a different philosophy about life altogether. So yes, thinking about sense of place but that's part of that. The reason that they think in terms of sense of place is because they have a history. They don't move around, and they have generation after generation who might be farming the same plots. But also the grandma is making the food that her mother made, and so on. So that's why they have this very parochial established sense of place that we don't have in America. We don't have that history. We have a little bit of it. Like in Memphis, we have barbecue and we have fried chicken, and you've got, other things in other parts of the country, but it's just not like you have in Europe.
Well, I'm glad you said the Memphis part, because you can get clam chowder from New England in a diner in Los Angeles, and you can get Texas barbecue in other places, and you can't, but you can only get really, if you think about it, you can really get real Memphis barbecue in Memphis, right? You can, maybe somebody copies it in New York or copies it. No, I just thought of this.
This is not as good.
It's not going to be as good, and it doesn't have the provenance because of the history. And part of that deals with the idea, and we're talking about the old world, they consider themselves stewards of that legacy. So when they buy a winery, or they're, we'll try and buy a winery in Burgundy, but if you were lucky enough to be part of that, like this gentleman I talked about, they really feel like they're stewarding the land for the next generation. And I don't think America has that sort of mentality. Maybe that does now, but that's the protection is built into sort of their culture.
Well, I think that it's sort of hit and miss in America.
Yeah.
And I think also, in Europe, I think is good and bad, because they oftentimes that leads to a very closed attitude
for sure.
about the rest of the world.
Right.
So if you're living in one particular village in Burgundy, and you have this generation after generation attitude, and if you don't try other people's wines and you think, oh, this is the only way to do it, then that is a real negative, because you're really closing you're closing off possibilities.
I agree with that. There is a whole the opposite of what I just was talking about, because particularly with food, the idea that Howard Johnson's, you could have the same hamburger in New York as you could in LA, and that's just the beauty of that was the beauty of America, right? You could
there's a sameness everywhere,
right? You could
like when I travel, and I'm we're traveling, making friends and selling wine, but in America you could be anywhere, like it all looks the same,
right? Exactly,
and all the restaurants are the same, and all the retailers are the same. It's like Phoenix is the same as Southern California being in San Diego.
It sort of blurred the lines, and I'm kind of thinking, wow, now we're going back to buy local, eat local, and maybe we're going back to an old European thing. But what I was going to say was that, the French winemakers, they love the fact that they can come to America and do whatever they want. Like, so they go to Oregon and they plant Pinot Noir.
They'll have brands out here.
Yes, and
that gives them the ability to do experimentation.
Exactly.
And to have some fun,
They're not shackled by the rules of their appellation.
But coming back to this concept of, in America, are we having this sort of shift to, wanting to be local, be, generation after generation? I think we have that, I was saying hit and miss in the wine business. So I know the wine business. And so we have a lot of family wineries, and you do have next generation going into the business, but there is also a handoff to the next generation who isn't really interested, and they want to get their money out of the property. I had that happen with my neighbors. I won't mention any names.
Yeah, of course.
Great family business with 3 generations, but some of the kids who inherited the business were living on the East Coast and, doing other things. And as farmers, you can be very wealthy and not have a penny in your pocket.
Right.
Because everything keeps going back into the land, into the winery. It's very capital intensive business.
Yes.
So if you have heirs who aren't involved, they want to get their money out of the business. So it has to be sold, and the buyers out there are corporate. Gallo just bought Rombauer.
And another winery.
Well, another one. The other winery wasn't so much of a family business, but Rombauer certainly was. And
here's a question. We've got so much to talk about. We're going to run out of time.
Well, yeah.
You think that you bought this in 1985, and then you spent a lot of money to obviously make it work, since half the roof was missing. But do you think that you could start today? Like, somebody could walk in without a substantial amount of money, do what you did, and then build a brand? Do you think that's even possible today with the amount of capital it takes?
Not the way that we did it.
And make a profit?
So you can do it. Like the guy that you're talking about, I forgot the name of the winery that Gallo bought, but he's very virtual. So there are wineries that don't own vineyards that are very virtual, And they can make good wine also.
Yeah.
And it's just a
Sure.
different road to success. So but with us, it's a philosophy. It's really, we're not just a winery. We're at the Blue Rock. We're food, wine, hospitality. We think very long-term on everything we do. We're not driven by profit. We do have to make a profit in order to have the business be sustainable, but that doesn't really drive our decisions. Our decision-making is really based on, how do we, make a great lifestyle for ourselves as owners, but for everybody who's working for us, because they're working with Blue Rock for choice. We found the right people, and our people are there because they want to be there. They're happy.
What surprised you the most when you? I mean, you were enamored. You look through the porthole. You like, I got to have this property. So you run home to your wife. I got to get this thing, and you go through all the work, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I've got this thing now. What surprised you the most about the headwinds of getting this thing going?
So buying it was a rush, and it was really exciting.
Of course.
And then, like you said, you know a lot. Is that yes? Then the reality set in. Is like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Serpentine.
Yeah.
So then you learn. Then the guys who know what they're doing saying, you can't plant grapes in serpentine, you dummy, you city boy. I was the city boy.
Yeah.
And actually, if I had known too much, if I had thought too hard about it, I might not have done it.
Yeah.
So sometimes, don't think too hard.
You
Follow your passions.
Right.
Otherwise, you just won't do anything. Right? You'll do whatever's safe. But lots of challenges. So what we did is my wife and I worked our daytime jobs. I wound up running an investment firm in San Francisco. It took me a while to get that position. Cheryl took a job as a radiologist, and we started having a family. And we worked, and on the weekends we would go out. So first we planted the vineyard, and we planted it in stages. And we hired people who knew what they were doing. So we hired a young management company. It was a young guy who was just getting started and wanted to be small. It was perfect for us. And do you know Ulysses Valdez? You know the story of Valdez?
I don't think so.
Well, I won't go in there because it's an interesting story.
I'll have to look it up.
But I won't go there. But he was like our first foreman. And then, we planted we planted half of the vineyard, then the next year, the other half, because it did take a lot of capital to do that. But we were doing it on a budget, but we were doing it right. We had a guy named Chip Leith living next to us, Lyeth. It's now a negociant wine owned by Boisset. But at the time, it was a beautiful.
I know the wine.
At the time, it was a beautiful estate winery next door to us. And Chip Leith, he really knew what he was doing. He was a farmer, and he had planted the Bordeaux 5, and it was the first Bordeaux 5 planting pretty much in Alexander Valley.
Wow.
So he helped me out and told me what to plant. So we did, as we planted, other people were planting all Chardonnay and other things that do okay in Alexander Valley, but not great, at least in the northern part. And he told me, he said, no, plant Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, plant a little Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot, plant the Bordeaux 5, and you'll do well. And that was great advice. I also had next door to me a guy who's still there, and he's still he was my mentor and a great farmer, Jim Rickards. So he owns JR Vines. And he's the greatest guy. And he's a real farmer. He's got this great handlebar mustache. He's a great guy, but he's just such a great farmer. And he came over and he mentored me. And
is that the camaraderie? Does that exist, do you think, throughout the wine industry?
Yeah, it still exists today.
Yeah.
There are very few secrets, and a lot of sharing of information. And it's a very open industry, and that's wonderful.
Because I've been working with the Armenian. I'm Armenian by trade, by birth, and it's a very fascinating part of the world for wine because it was run by the Soviets for so long. So they're kind of old world. They've been making wine since 6,000 years that we know of, but they've only recently made wine of any repute because the USSR just shut everything off.
Is this in Armenia?
In Armenia.
Okay.
And so one of the issues is this camaraderie. it's so new. Everybody wants to be the first one to the market, first one with this, first one who does that, first one to use French oak, first one to use caucus oak, whatever, that there is no conversation amongst the vineyards. And I've always thought that in America, we've always had that. There's the Vineyards Association of Napa, Sonoma, I'm sure, all the regions have their camaraderie and share their experiences and the problems that they're having.
There are a lot of consultants also in the wine business. And so the information will move around from one person to another because the consultants will hire somebody to help them out. And then that person starts a consulting business. So there's, it's hard to keep secrets.
So
there's not a whole lot of reason to, because not everyone is driven to really make wine the same way or to make great wine.
Yeah, that's true.
People have, different mojo, so to speak, they're making wine at different price points.
That's a really good point, actually. Even if you have a secret that you're going to create this amazing Bordeaux blend and you don't want your neighbors to know, it doesn't matter because they may not care anyway, because that's not their fascination.
That's not what they're doing.
They want Chardonnay or something.
Yeah.
So what was did you have a vision? Now you've got the saying, you've consulted with your neighbors, they've helped you along. Was the vision forming to be this sort of encompassing foodie, wine, hospitality thing? Or were you, and one of my questions sometimes is, what would happen if profit wasn't part of the conversation? What if you didn't have to make a profit? And not that you wanted to lose money, but let's just say there's some weird parallel universe where profitability was not important and it was just about the wine. Would it be different?
So that was our universe to begin with, because we were very small.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started off, we were just growers. We actually started the winery in 1999, and I hired Nick Goldschmidt as my first consulting winemaker. And still, he's my neighbor today.
Oh, wow.
And he's Nick.
Great. I don't know him, but
he's such a great guy and wonderful winemaker. But we were only making a few hundred cases, so really profit wasn't what it was about. It was like, do something great. But philosophically, we have been, I think, very consistent as a winery from the beginning. And I'll talk about the winery and then later about the food part, because the food and hospitality wasn't part of our vision to begin with, because we didn't have any way to do that.
Right.
We were just, the buildings were uninhabitable.
Yeah, that would slow things down.
We didn't have any money, so we're doing it piece by piece. So every year,
right,
whatever money we would make would go into the vineyard, and then later it went into the winery. So our vision at first, when we started the winery, was to make a small amount of wine, and we continued to sell grapes to other wonderful wineries, but to do absolutely the best you can without any compromise. Do something great, because in the corporate world, where I ran an investment firm where we did a really good job for our customers, but we had a corporate owner, so it was always about how much money you're making. So you always had to make some compromises, and here we had the ability to do something that was as good as you could possibly do it, and that is so rewarding. That's fun to do.
That's a good point.
And so that's what we did. Our first vintage was 1999. And we very slowly grew that. And the original concept was, we looked at Silver Oak, who was our neighbor, by the way.
Yeah, right. Oh, well,
we shared a fence line with Silver Oak for 30 years.
Wow.
They have just moved out. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. They built a new, beautiful facility close to Healdsburg.
Yes.
But yeah, they were a neighbor.
That's fascinating.
And, I looked at their success, and they kept it simple. They had one wine. Life is a Cabernet. That was their slogan.
Yeah.
And I looked at what Mondavi was doing, and Mondavi made a portfolio of great wines, but they didn't get credit for the great Pinot Noir. Everybody thought of them as Cabernet, Cabernet, Cabernet. So I thought, well, let's keep it simple and just make one wine. That did change.
Well, we were talking about this one before we turned on the mics, and that was this idea of ambassadors, and we'll get into the business. We're already almost done here, which is amazing. We have so much to talk about. But this post-COVID world it created some weird consumers, as you and I mentioned earlier. We were both up 30% or so during COVID. People were buying whatever we asked them to buy. And then the COVID world for most internet-based non-winery clubs and subscription models and sales. I mean, wine.com got clobbered, post-COVID. And so you have this idea, and I love this concept. It's a great term, the Ambassador Club. And so that people can join the club. And it's so important for a winery to be experiential, for them to get that bottle of wine, to taste it at the property, or to hear your story today, which is a fascinating story, and to tell that story when you're opening the bottle of wine. And every time you open that bottle of wine, you remember the story. And that's what an ambassador is. It's somebody that's waving that flag all the time. And that's been successful for you.
Well, I want to sort of back up to when we opened the tasting room to what our thought process was, because it hasn't really changed from the very beginning. So in 2015, I started the renovation of the historic winery. And it took me 2 years altogether to restore it.
It's like recent history, really, 2015. Wow.
Yeah, well, we didn't open it until 2017.
Wow.
When we actually opened it. So prior to that, we didn't have a DTC business, direct-to-consumer business. It was all wholesale and, fairly small, but, growing clientele through wholesale. And then when we opened it, we spent a lot of money renovating it. And it really and truly is beautiful. And we salvaged every scrap of 130-year-old redwood.
It was so beautiful.
And reused it to make the windows, the doors.
Beautiful.
We also have a luxury cot guest house on the property. And there, all the windows.
Can you guys make a note of that, Ian? Would just make a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you later. It's actually, we've partnered with Inspirato. I'll get to that. But anyway, so, and then we furnished it beautifully with antiques. I mean, it truly is gorgeous.
Wow.
And we made the decision from the very beginning, we're not going to be open to the public and that we're going to be private so that when visitors come, they get a private experience where they can really engage with us. So we're by appointment, but we went one step further. We're by referral, is that people who are coming in, we want to know how they know about it so that they're not just, we did a Google search and you got 5 stars.
Wow.
Because we don't want to be on Google searches.
Right.
And we're not being haughty. We're just saying that, so when people come and do a tasting with us, they can do a tasting that lasts for 2 hours. They're going to taste 6 or 7 reserve wines. Everything comes with a charcuterie plate. It comes with a senior host and a tour of the property and of the vineyard.
Wow.
So it's really engaging.
Wow.
So if we're going to spend that much time with people, we want to spend it with time with people who, are the right people who want to be engaged with us. And, yes, love us, go home with our wines, and then tell their friends about us. So we're at 20,000 case production, and almost all of it's word of mouth. We're the biggest winery that nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah, well, I hadn't. So
we also do lunch. So we have a fantastic small-scale lunch program, but I mean very couture. It's in our private dining room, Villa Maria, named after the original Villa Maria Winery. Sure. It's overlooking beautiful views of Alexander Valley, and the cuisine is fabulous. But I have to tell you, part of the story is that the women who are preparing it, they came out of they were vineyard workers. There were 2 women who, one of them has been with us since she was 18 years old, Adela, worked in the vineyard, hard work. Then we take her into hospitality. So our whole motto is to find great people who work for us and to give them opportunities. And every worker who works for us, and this is unheard of in the vineyard business, but every worker, from people who are doing handwork in the vineyard on up to my general manager, everybody gets the same benefits. Healthcare, 401k
Man, you're messing
package.
everything up with these wonderful things at places to work, because it doesn't work like that.
Well,
today's society.
Well, it's expensive, but so the question is, if you really treat your employees right, and if you have the same people year round who are doing things in the vineyard, so they're doing the pruning, then they're doing the canopy work and making sure every grape cluster gets even light and heat. Then they work harvest. Then they work in the winery. They get to taste the wine. They eat with us. Everybody gets treated with respect. Does it show up in the bottle? Then I think it does, but
I
you
think
have
absolutely.
to taste the wines to see whether we're wasting our money or not.
So that's
going back just to finish,
yeah.
the women so they came out of the vineyard, started working in hospitality. We had a chef come in and train them culinary.
Wow.
And they are knocking out's the wrong way of putting it. They're putting out, I would say, Michelin 1-star food.
Wow.
So you can have lunch with us and have a fascinating 3-hour experience.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's a very refreshing approach and refreshing story, and sort of the story that would define that question, which is, what if profit wasn't part of the motivation? And it sounds like that's what you'd probably do anyway, just because the passion of doing it and sharing with it. And I totally agree with you. Terroir is not the climate, the soil, and the phosphorus. Terroir includes the philosophy of the winemaker, the experience of the winemaker, the proprietor's philosophy. You may not find a piece of tannin in there that explains that, but it comes out in the bottle.
So there is absolutely a human element to terroir.
Absolutely.
And in Burgundy, I think you can prove it better than anywhere, where, because of the inheritance laws, you cannot pass up one son or daughter for another. So let's say a Grand Cru property gets divided into many different parcels, and you'll have, I'll mispronounce her name, but Lalou Loire will have, these 5 rows. Next to her, another grower will have these 5 rows. So terroir-wise, in the classical sense, it's exactly the same.
Right.
Except that one winemaker, Lalou, will always make the best wine, the longest lasting wine. And the next guy who has the next 5 rows doesn't. It's good, but it's not as good. So is there a human element? Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, that hit me, and we're almost done, but I have a question I got to ask you. But that hit me when I was reading the book Wine and War by the Kladstrup family, which is a fascinating history of the World War II in France. And I go, wait a minute, these farmers and the kids of those farmers that experienced this problem are going to tell these stories, and that's going to show up somehow in what the wines they make, because it was handed down. In fact, tomorrow morning, I have Arthur Langsant coming in. His grandmother, was in the chateau when the Nazis came in and started shooting up the paintings.
Wow.
Right?
Really?
I mean, she's still alive. She's 95. She lives in South Africa. Right. And so you can't tell me that experience doesn't do something to your soul to protect what's coming out of your family next. And I think that's very important. We're already at 54 minutes. The show's only supposed to be 50, but I have to ask.
We got to talk about the wines.
Yeah, I have to ask. We'll talk about the wines. Okay, let's do that now. Well, we're going to taste them afterwards anyway. But tell me you've got 3 wines here. What are we making there now?
So we do make a portfolio of wines, but there are 3 wines that make it into distribution. And the first 2 are Baby Blue, and then the other one is the Estate Cabernet Sauvignon.
Mm-hmm.
And Baby Blue, I created Baby Blue in 2008, and it's sort of a French concept, is that when you're replanting the vineyard, and all of us in California, because of AXR, rootstock, have gone through a replanting process. The young vines don't yet have the depth and complexity that they're going to have. They're like children. They've got the DNA, they've got the great potential, you hope,
yes,
but they're just not there yet. Sometimes you want to just slap them in the face. So we took that concept of, you want to make a wine that is more approachable. You drink that while you're waiting on the Grand Vin in the cellar, and also less expensive. But we didn't want to make a second wine. We wanted to make something that represents the estate, that has that, lovely, approachable, but a serious approachable
youthful
wine, not an industrial approachable wine.
Right.
You know what I mean? No
Sure.
residual sugar, oak chips,
Not
a really
Tophatic
great
Red
wine.
and Josh Cabernet.
But
Okay.
we joke. We say we send our babies out into the world to make friends, and they do. And they bring people into the winery who then learn about the estate wines and our best barrels wines, which is the reserve wines. But Baby Blue, these are our best wines. They're
Wow.
the hardest wines to make, because making a wine that's at an affordable price point, that's really has great aromatics, balance, length on the palate, personality, that is not an easy thing to do.
It represents your vision.
You wait till you taste them.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. So, it's interesting you said that, because Stag's Leap in the Judgment of Paris, I think that was their first leaf of usable grapes. And so the idea that you can't produce,
No,
it's
you
sort of
can't.
blown out of the water, that you have to wait 5 years, 7, 10 years, even an enologist might say 100 years before you get, to understand what you got. And here this wine wins. But that's fascinating. Is this a Bordeaux blend or is it just a straight cab?
So, there are 3 different wines, and
I mean, the baby blues.
they're all blends. They're all
they're all
blends. But to call it a Bordeaux blend wouldn't be fair because I cheated a little bit. But it's a very
What, you put
intense.
Syrah in there or something? Or
Well, I'm
Zinfandel?
talking about the white wine right now.
Okay.
So the white wine is Sauvignon Blanc primarily.
Yeah.
But then it has Semillon from our new Gapstone vineyard,
Wow.
and also Viognier from our new Gapstone vineyard. So it would be a Bordeaux blend except for the Viognier.
Actually, that was on my list here. I didn't get to it. There's some conversation about the Petaluma Gap on your website. Is that where the Gapstone Vineyard is?
Yeah, it's an incredible vineyard that
Well,
I don't know why
we're
I
just
did
going to
it.
go long here because I want to hear
Just
about
go
this.
along and they'll edit it out.
So I think the Petaluma Gap is one of the most fascinating valleys, in particular since it runs east-west to Sonoma, but has, now they have Appalachian status, is producing some amazingly complex, interesting wines from there.
So there's real complexity that I'm getting out of Petaluma Gap that I don't get out of some other areas.
It's really fascinating.
It's really interesting.
But Pinot, I've not had a Sauvignon. I don't think I've had a Sauvignon Blanc from the Petaluma Gap.
Oh my God.
So I'm looking forward to that.
I got to send you our Sauvignon Blanc.
Because
And I got to send you our Sauvignon Blanc. It's amazing. I didn't drink it today.
okay.
So we're going to go out. Let's just go over time. Are we going to taste the wines?
We'll taste them afterward.
Okay. So in 2015, I had a little bit of extra money because my wife had to take her retirement in a lump sum.
Because
when
I was
she
going to
retired.
say, says no one ever, but go ahead.
And at that time, the stock market had already risen so much, and we wanted to diversify. And so we said, let's do what we would do best. And I found a piece of raw land. It was 30 acres of never planted pasture land. And I had worked with a guy named Alfred Cass, who is he is a PhD in soil science, and his specialty is vineyard development. And he had been in every vineyard soil pit around the world that you can imagine.
Oh.
And he's the guru of vineyard soil science. And he had worked for KJ for years with another guy named Daniel Roberts, who was the PhD in he did plant I don't know if it's pathology, but he was the plant guy, and Alfred Cass was the soil guy. So both of them worked for KJ, went on their own. And Alfred had done all of my soil work at Blue Rock. And Alfred told me, he says, Kenny, this 30-acre piece of land has the most beautiful soil I have ever seen. So he had done all the soil investigations for a previous owner who had started to develop it in 2008, actually put the stakes in the ground.
Wow.
And then when the recession hit, depression, whatever you want to call it, they abandoned the project, right?
Yeah.
So I took my guy, Garrett Buckland, from Premier Viticulture out there. We did our own soil investigations. Garrett had done work for the Isley Vineyard in Calistoga. He said, Kenny, this is the most beautiful soil I've seen since Isley.
Wow.
So I bought it.
Wow.
I don't know. I love Burgundy. I love Pinot. I'd always wanted to have a Pinot Chardonnay vineyard.
Cheryl, right?
Cheryl.
Did she support this idea? Because I get in trouble for buying nothing.
Yeah, she trusts me. She believes in me. We've done well. We have a great life.
That's
We've done well. And
so 30 acres.
So 30 acres, but never planted.
Yeah.
So no disease.
Yeah, right. No phylloxera.
Not dealing with old row orientation or bad spacing. Do it from the ground up right.
Wow.
Now, guess what? It's next door to Gap's Crown.
Really? Wow.
Next door to Gap's Crown, where you've got
you can put Pinot Noir there?
10 wineries who are making some of the highest scoring Pinot and Chardonnay.
Beautiful.
On the other side of us, San Giacomo's Roberts Road Vineyard.
Oh, yes.
Just got the highest score in the wine spectator for Chardonnay. It's a great neighborhood.
Wow.
And so I bought the vineyard, and it allows to plant it from the ground up. So, oh my God, I love this vineyard. It has so much volcanic rock in it.
Mm.
So the neighborhood around us, there's a lot of adobe clay. So you can see it as black, sort of heavy clay.
Mm. And
they're making some good wines and some really very good wines. This vineyard is so different, though. It's all volcanic rock. We spent, first of all, in 2008, they spent, I don't know how much money taking out rock. Oh my God, you should see how many piles and piles and piles of rock. And then we had to buy an Italian rock crusher and a specialized Kubota 115 horsepower narrow tractor. And we spent, with this rock crusher, we spent the entire year at creep speed, just putting up rocks, just so we could work the property.
That's fascinating.
And then I picked all these heritage clones. So we have 6 clones of Pinot Noir, and none of the sort of higher yielding commercial type clones.
No, right. You're talking
it's all the great stuff.
Yeah.
And I made some mistakes because if we're, as a seller of grapes, if you're only growing 1.5 tons per acre, you're just losing money.
Right.
But as winemakers, if you make a $80 Pinot bottle, then you're okay.
Right.
But 6 clones of Pinot Noir, Wente clone and Claret clone of Chardonnay. But then I planted an Italian clone, 3 acres of Italian clone Sauvignon Blanc. It's called Rigedo.
Huh.
And I had done all the research on it. It's aromatic. They love it. There's very little of it. I had to search to get budwood for it. Oh my God, the Gapstone Sauvignon Blanc.
So what leaf are you
I've
in
ever
on this?
tasted. What
leaf are you in on this vineyard?
6th leaf.
Oh, okay, so you're
so the
making
Sauvignon
wine
Blanc, the 4th leaf Sauvignon Blanc. We have it at the tasting room.
Yeah.
We put it in a new boot puncheon, and then most of it, I'd say 70%, was in neutral oak barrels. So it is oak aged, and it's just an amazing.
You're having
wine.
fun, aren't you?
I'm having a good time.
But
everybody working at Blue Rock,
lit up when you're
everybody
saying this.
working at Blue Rock is having fun. If they're not, we don't let them stay.
The idea of clonal selection for vineyard, and now we're getting into some pretty geeky stuff, but you're consulting enologist, a nurseryman of sorts, who is looking at the soil saying, because I find a lot of Pinot Noirs from parts of California get a little too smoky just from the terroir, not from the oak, from the barrel toasting. But you hire these guys to look at the soil, to look at the chemical breakdown, and say, okay, these are the varietals we think, and these are the clones we think are going to produce interesting wines. That's what you did.
I did all the clonal selection.
Oh, you did.
Whereas Garrett Buckland did actually the rootstock. So he matched the rootstock to the soil.
Wow.
Because the soil had very high potassium. So we use 420A and RG as rootstocks.
So, this begs that question that I ask a lot, but because we've gotten here, I want to ask you. What is the end game of this? Here, in the bowels of making wine, in the bowels of selecting colognes, in the bowels of selecting rootstock and testing the soil and crushing the rock, and all the things that you do and all the expense that goes into it, what is the end game? What are you trying to do?
So I have to admit that with this particular vineyard, I didn't have an end game.
Okay.
It's build it, and they will come.
Yeah, right.
And that generally it's worked out throughout my life.
Yeah.
First with my investment firm, and then later with Blue Rock. Although I would never use the past tense when I say successful, because we're always working on success. But on this particular vineyard, it was like, build it and they will come. Let's try it.
But
Let's do it. Let's do a great job and see if it works out. And I have to admit that it hasn't yet really worked out. I made some mistakes. If you look at it as a business, I made some mistakes.
Forget the business part. I'm talking about philosophical endgame. To create the best wine from this vineyard that you can, to express the terroir as best that you can. And every year you're going to test another clone, or every year you might plant something in 3 years and wait 5 more years for that clone to take. The end game of that, not the profitability, but the end game of constantly testing things, changing how you punch down, changing what barrels you're using. What's that end game?
Oh my God. I have to tell you, I don't have an end game.
It's just to create the
I
best
don't
you
have
can.
an end game. And if
Okay.
you look at me and you say, well, this guy, he's an older guy. He's got to have an end game.
I didn't say that.
And yeah, but I don't have an end game.
Okay. Well, I don't get necessarily an answer to that question because
Did Robert Mondavi have an end game?
no, something in your mind, some passion, because Mike Gergich comes from Croatia and he lands in St. Helena, doesn't have a job, and he's he wants to create, and I think I think the answer really is some creative force in you and obviously very creative, to express yourself, and this is the way you're doing it. And we're going to do the best we can by testing all these different things.
That's my end game.
Yeah.
So my end game is daily. And I really mean that, is that we don't have an exit plan. And, we hope that there's continuity. I've got fantastic staff throughout the winery.
Right.
So there is, they don't depend on me. And I think that I've created a philosophy in a environment that will be ongoing. But I'm glad you mentioned Mike Gergich, because I'm a tennis player, and I went to the tennis tournament in Palm Springs.
Yeah.
And I was going to buy some wine in one of the grocery stores, and there was this old guy. He was in his 90s.
Yeah, he lives down there.
He's pouring wine.
Oh, come on.
Guess who it was?
Yeah, it was
Mike Gergich. So he's 90 years old or 92, and he's still pouring wine. Okay. So I got a long way to go before I'm 92. So
he lives in the desert.
Yeah, hopefully I'll still be pouring wine then.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll love to have you come down and pour some wine for us.
I'll do it.
I'm going to ask you a quick question, since I'm going to probably break this into 2 shows anyway. And since your wife's a doctor, and you've been to France, and you're growing all kinds of grapes, both from Burgundy and Bordeaux, this is a question. This is a book written by Dr. Murray. He's a MD. He's also a homeopathic doctor. This was written in the 70s. Wine is the best medicine, and it's full of human ailments, and what wine you should take to relieve the symptoms and or cure the ailment. And so things like allergies, anemia, bronchitis, etc. So I'm going to give you one of these ailments in 3 choices. Now, the percentage of accuracy and the answers has been 33%. So no one really hasn't.
Okay. It's all over.
Yeah. It is mostly like the MW or the MS test, why did you choose that answer is more important than actually the answer, right? So let's say you have, I'm not going to say menopause. That's probably not going to apply. Let's say you have nervous depression. Okay.
Okay.
You could have yourself a young Beaujolais, a dry Champagne, or a Medoc Red to help you with your nervous depression. Which one would you?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
I think I would probably have a Champagne.
Why?
It just makes me feel good.
That's funny. That's that some of the answers in this book are, we're not sure what it does, but you just feel better.
Yeah, well, why not? Champagne's always good.
But the answer is Medoc, and it talks about the deficiency of phosphorus in people that have psychic fatigue.
Oh, he's being literal.
Yeah, very little. And so that you had that. But there's a dosage. Yeah. There's a dosage to this. What do you think the dosage is? Oh,
I would say for me, it would be a half a bottle.
Well, you're only halfway there.
A whole bottle.
Because it's 2 glasses before and during meals. So you can drink a bottle a day.
Yeah.
And maybe your nervous depression will subside.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up health, because, with our generation, you're younger than me, but I'll still put you in with baby boomers, is that, the wine started growing in the 1980s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interest in wine in America. And it was because of the French paradox. It was thought to be healthy. And now you've got a new generation. So this is the headwind for the wine generation. One of many is that now there's, articles saying, well, no amount of alcohol is good for you. And
I think that's accurate. But I also think, since this industry is 6,000 years old, even more, it's pretty much the same as it was 6,000 years ago. It's fermented grape juice, except for all the things that we do to make it taste better. But on this root level, it's still the same. And I think that every generation, I am a baby boomer, eventually arrives with a maturity, I use that word, to appreciate properly in what I call now an honest glass of wine. Not the stuff at the shelf, not Apothic Red, not, Snoop Dogg's Cali Red. I'm talking about wines like Blue Rock. And yeah, these 3 or 4 events throughout the history of wine, the Judgment of Paris, the movie Sideways, and the French Paradox, have done different things to change the consumption. But I think eventually everybody decides there's something special about a glass of wine that's properly made.
Well, we are getting a younger generation in the winery, and a lot of parents bringing their children in. But we're getting a younger generation, and they love the experience. So they're very experiential, but they also love wine. and they're going home with a lot of Blue Rock, and they are telling their friends. So we're doing our best to bring that next generation along. And I want to be their Milton, their pick.
Well, that's a great, noble pursuit, and I think they're all full of crap anyway, because they talk about going to Whole Foods and the Lazy Acres and drinking organic and blah, blah, but then they drink White Claw. Which is fun.
You got to start someplace.
It's been such a great pleasure having you here, Kenny.
It's
really
great. Thank
great
you.
conversation.
I enjoyed meeting you.
Great for sharing
Look
the
forward
story.
to an ongoing friendship.
Absolutely. We're going to come
and
see you.
us, okay? Please.
We're due up. I'm up all the time. I'm trying to buy a house in Yountville. So,
oh, really? Yountville?
We'll be hanging around.
Okay. We'll fly up to Santa Rosa.
And we'll come to Santa Rosa. And actually, my O2 license hangs at Wine Hooligans or in Santa Rosa. So,
okay. So, Santa Rosa Airport's the way to come.
We'll do it.
Okay. Great.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kahn. Don't forget to subscribe, because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.